thumbs if it's working. Is it working? Yes. All right. Well, hey, Calvary, how you guys doing?
All right.
How was your afternoon? It was good. You guys have been very, very kind to me. Barry, Chad, especially, you guys have been very kind. I appreciate it. You guys are like Jesus, I was thinking. Just like the way you guys are like a family is really, that's what it was like. That's what it's supposed to be like. Caring for each other, loving each other. But yeah, let's get started. I'm glad you came back. I'm glad I didn't scare you away. And if you weren't here, that's okay. You probably are happy you missed it anyway. But either way, I'm Corey, and I feel like what I've got to bring today, which is basically part 2, or it's connected at least to the sermon this morning, is powerful and I think has the ability to sustain us, or maybe re-sustain us in what we're going through. So I'll just give a little brief overview of what happened this morning. So basically we were learning about how Peter got out of the boat. Jesus called him, but Peter had a couple steps before he got out of the boat. The first one was he invited God's voice to speak into his life. And that's what we've got to do in our life. And then secondly, he trusted God's voice, in particularly over all other people's voices. There are lots of times that we might hear other well-meaning people say well-meaning things, and we can trust them over what God says. And God's infallible. And then lastly, we've got to follow God's voice, not just trust him with our head, but trust him with our feet and our actions. So basically, that's an overview to how we got to get out of the boat in the first step of faith. What's actually funny, and later in the sermon you'll learn that that's the little faith. That's the little faith. What I'm talking about today is hard faith. I'm not saying that that's not very hard, but there's also times in our life the sustaining faith to follow Jesus and to re-sustain ourselves sometimes is even harder. So, like I said, that part of the story is powerful. It can be pretty powerful. Like, man, get out of the boat, follow Jesus. It can be pretty exciting and motivating. And the thing is, that's only the first half of the story. And lots of us have maybe got out of the boat. And maybe that's just representing when I decided to follow Jesus. I decided, I'm going to step out of the boat with faith. I'm going to follow Jesus, trust him. And maybe you started doing that, or maybe it's something in your life, whether it's trusting with your kids or your spouse or your finances, and you, just like Peter, your circumstances got very, very overwhelming. All right, so I got a friend, his name's Dan, and maybe like you, but definitely like me, we hate running. Like, I hate running. If I go to the gym, I'm not running. I do not run. I like treadmills. I can't do it. I can do maybe playing basketball or something, but I can't run just for the sake of running. And he had a friend one day who sat him down on a Thursday night and said, look, we're going to run this half marathon. And he motivated him, convinced him, envisioned him, passionately. You get the 13.1 sticker thing on the back of your car. You get that little shirt and the little, like a sign with the number, and you can put it up in your room. He kind of got all excited about it. And so he did what he should not have done. He went, paid money, and signed up immediately. Okay? Now, this is called a bad decision. And he jumped out of the boat. Like, he just went for it. And he'd never run. And the worst part was the marathon, half marathon, was Saturday. So it was a day and a half, no practicing, no running. He's out of shape, doesn't want to run. It was a bad idea, right? And so let's just say he gets all hyped up. He's going up to the starting line. He's getting all ready. And he starts. And for the first half mile, he's feeling it. And about a mile in, he just starts like, oh man, I've never felt this. I've never thought this. I've never hurt here. He starts having these problems. Now, that's kind of silly, right? But I think that's sometimes what happens in our life with Jesus. We get out of the boat. We get excited. Now, albeit we're not being convinced by a God who might not have the best intentions because he's lonely and wants to run with somebody. But maybe we get convinced and we get excited, and then for some reason that moment can fade. I'm not saying our faith fades, but our will and our hope to follow can kind of become less and less like dear to our hearts. And this kind of makes you think. Maybe you've had these thoughts. I've had these thoughts for sure. You might start wondering, maybe after you've been following Jesus, maybe you're in a particular season where you're surrounded by a lot of unbelievers who kind of are like, what are you talking about? Whether it's starting off in college or whether it's being on a sports team for the first time. You might remember those moments, or also, taking a new job, or maybe you're going and you're stopping a job for the first time and you're surrounded by just believers and not unbelievers, and you find it where it's hard to be like Jesus sometimes in the everyday life, and it might have been easier in other times. Now, this makes me think a lot of times when I look at God is, God, why is it so hard? Like, well, why is it so hard? Like, why is it not easier? But like, why does it sometimes feel like that? The more I follow God, the more I trust God, the more I put my faith in God, the harder it gets. I'm like, okay, I need to have more faith. I do it, and then I'm like, okay, it just got harder. That's great. You kind of find that, like, you get more resistance the more you push, which makes sense if you think about it, but it doesn't feel great. You're like, well, this does not feel or look great and doesn't make me excited. And if we look into the story with Peter, the second half answers this question. Like, why does it get so hard? Why does it get so tough? So like we talked about, Peter had just stepped out of the boat. He's walking on water. He just trusted Jesus in a way that no human in the history would ever do again. Nobody would, that we know of, that I know of at least, has ever walked on water. Towards you, I don't know that. I mean, it could have happened, but like, I don't know. I've not heard of it. And Peter's doing that. And then something happens. So let's jump to Matthew 14:28. I'll give you some time. I think it'll be on the screen too, so you don't have to really want to take your time to do it. So Jesus walked on the water toward him. And Peter says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. And Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But, it's a big word, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, Peter's walking on water, and it's going amazing, right? That's what we see in verse 28. 29. He's walking on the water. He's going toward Jesus. That's pretty astounding. But then something happens. Okay? If you look at, came toward Jesus, but when he saw the wind. Now, I'm trying to kind of imagine this happening, because that goes pretty quick in the Bible. It just kind of quickly says, he walked on water, but then this happened. What I think might have happened, now I'm just speculating, but maybe there was a really loud wave that crashed, or maybe the wind blew him off balance a little bit, maybe a thunder boomed and like lightning landed near him, or maybe he got splashed by a little water in the face and had to blink his eyes or something. And what happens is Peter inadvertently looks away from Jesus. And this brings me to my first point, which is Peter loses focus on Jesus. Now, it might not have been intentional, but he loses his focus. And what's important to understand is that the wind and the waves, I mentioned this last verse, but they didn't change. Okay, it's not like the storm wasn't there, and then when he started walking, the storm popped up. The storm had been there the whole time. And what had changed was Peter's focus. Okay, this kind of reminds me of football a little bit. How many of you guys like football? Ooh, I got a lot. Okay, if you don't, just bear with me. Maybe you understand the reference. I think you will. So, I love football. I played quarterback growing up. That was something that I did. I was pretty successful at it. I love the Dallas Cowboys. They're America's team. I mentioned that last time. I don't know if you got it, but now you got it. I loved it. But even as a successful quarterback, one of the first things I learned, young, 6th grade maybe, I remember coach looked at me, he said, Corey, physical talent is good. Paul actually says this later in one of his epistles. Physical talent's good, but it's the mental focus, the mental toughness that separates the good from the bad. I remember going, okay, that doesn't make sense. Then I remember, as I played, I realized that he was right. Then I thought about it. The best quarterbacks of all time were not the best physically. They weren't the biggest, the best throwers, most accurate. Heck, they weren't even the smartest. They're the most mentally focused. It means maybe like, I don't know, Tom Brady, that's the guy right now. He's not the most athletic, he's not the most physical, but what separates him is the stadium, whether he's home or away, whether his receivers are good or bad, whether or not his defense is good or bad, how big the moment is, how big the play is, whatever it is, he can be focused on his job each and every play. No matter how big the moment is, doesn't affect him. Now there are quarterbacks who are way stronger than him, who could throw it way better than him, who are smarter than him, but they get lost, whether it's in the lights, or whether it's in the cameras, whether it's in the stadium, but it doesn't happen to the best ones. My coach told me, he said, a quarterback who loses his focus loses. He said, and I think, along with that, I think a Christian who loses his focus on Jesus loses. I think we're defeated. I think when you lose your focus on Jesus, you become a defeated Christian. I just think that's how it works. I think that's why we're kind of called Christians, like Christians. Like I think the idea is we keep our eyes and we model after Jesus. Now, the problem with Peter is not only that he takes his eyes off of Jesus, but he focuses on the waves. Now, I put it actually as this: Peter refocuses on his surroundings. Now, if you go look at verse 30, especially at the beginning, it says, "But when he saw the wind, he was afraid." Now, if you look at the original language, the word saw here kind of doesn't do it justice. The word saw is physical. Yes, he looked away and looked at it. But it also means, the exact definition, let me read it. The exact definition is to purposely direct one's mind and or mind's eye towards. And so the idea is that it's a hybrid of both physical and metaphorical. Like he's not only shifting his eyes, but he's shifting his focus, his brain, his energy, and he's focusing on the waves. Now, this brings me kind of to this idea that Peter wasn't just looking away from Jesus, but he was focusing on the wind and the waves, right? And it kind of made me think of another football game, okay? Now I know, this is two football analogies and one thing that's a big deal. But, so the Cowboys, we were playing a team in 1995, NFC Championship, really big deal, really big game. It's supposed to be like kind of like a big time game. We were playing a guy, you might have heard of him, his name's Brett Favre. He was a young coming up quarterback who was supposed to be pretty good, okay? He was pretty all-star, he's down the Hall of Fame, do the most, he's a big deal. And from the get-go, first drive, he throws an interception. This means he threw the ball, the defense caught it. Bad, don't do that. And what happened was, he came out the second time, he did it again. And then the third time, and then the fourth time. Now this was all in the first half. Real bad, got his team smoked, we crushed them, right? Fun for me, but when I was watching his after-game interview, what he said was, I couldn't stop focusing on my mistakes. Now, here's the big thing. He didn't lose focus. He didn't stop focusing. So the question in our life shouldn't be, what are you focusing? Are you focusing? The question should be, what are you focusing on? Brett Favre wasn't not focusing. He was focusing on the wrong thing. He was focusing on what he did wrong and what not to do. Not to throw an interception. He was focusing on not messing up, not doing the bad thing, or he was focusing on what he had already done. And so what I'm saying is, I think as Christians, the question shouldn't be whether we're focusing, but it's what are you focusing on? And I think you can focus on good things. Not throwing picks is a good thing. You don't want to do that. But your focus needs to be on, how can I win this play? And I think for Christians it should be, how can I focus on Jesus? Not how can I do the right thing or how to do the good thing, but how can I do what Jesus wants me to do here? Now, you might be hearing all that and you go, okay, Corey, kind of lost with football analogies, but how important is that? If let's say I'm focused on being good, like legalism almost. Like, I'm focused on being good, but I'm actually good. Then it doesn't really matter who I'm following. And my answer would be yes, because where we focus our eyes determines where we follow. So our focus determines where we follow. Now, or what we follow, or even more precisely, who we follow. So if I'm focused on legalism, I'm going to achieve legalism, but I'm going to miss Jesus on the way. So, when Peter begins to focus on the wind and the waves, it says he was afraid. Now, you don't want to get this mixed up. Peter was fearful the whole time. There was fear the whole time. What courage is stepping out in face of fear. It's not that fear doesn't exist. That's what bravery is, stepping out when there is fear. That's what Peter did. But what happened was he looked at the wind and the waves, he then focused on it, and then he began to follow his fear. His fear was there, and then he followed it. He followed his fear. Now, this is kind of the same for us. I think we do this all the time. Like, for example, I took Spanish class in high school, okay? I actually took it 3 years in middle school, 4 years in high school, 7 straight years of Spanish. Got an A every year. Now, when I went to every class, I sat in the front row, I took all the notes, I got A's on all the tests, I got all the stuff right. Do I know anything about Spanish? Not a lick. You can ask them. I was at Dawn's today, and I couldn't even remember to say gracias instead of thank you. Like, it was bad. Like, I'm really bad at Spanish. Now, was my focus bad? To focus on good grades? No. But when I focused on good grades, instead of Spanish, thinking, oh yeah, if I learn Spanish, that'll be good. No. What happened was I focused on my grades, I got the good grades, so I followed it to its, logical conclusion, but I missed the whole reason, the whole point of it. I missed it all, just because I wanted to get a good grade in the class. I think we do the same thing all the time. Just at a simple way, how many people go to a job and they focus on a paycheck rather than working and developing a career? We do that all the time. Or with kids, we focus on so they have good behavior, but we don't deal with their heart. Or here's one that struggled with me, especially at a Christian college, is maybe I focus on looking godly rather than being godly. My focus is, looking godly, I guess, is a good thing. But it's not what we're focused on, it's the result of what we focus on, which is I want to focus on following Jesus, which in turn will make me godly, which in turn will make me look godly. But instead I'm focusing on the wrong thing. And the thing is, there's a fix, but this is where it gets hard. So Peter, he starts sinking, right? This is like bad news. You don't start sinking in a storm. And Peter does something that stood out to me, maybe even more than walking on the water, getting out of the boat. It says, immediately, when he falls, beginning to sink. So he hasn't sunk yet. He's not underwater. He hasn't even tried to swim. It says he cried out, Lord, save me. Now, this means that Peter immediately turned to Jesus. Immediately. He started to sink, and he goes, oh, geez, turn to Jesus. And I think, especially in our culture of America, where you earn what you work for. You get what you do. That's how it works. And with Jesus, I think we can kind of start sinking, maybe because we're overwhelmed, we're exhausted because of family life, we're consumed by our work, or our finances are wrecking our nerves. That's really common. And what we do is we become discouraged and anxious and overwhelmed, and then we want to beat it ourselves. We want to kind of swim out. You're like, well, I'm sinking, but I'll stay afloat, get above water, then I'll ask Jesus for help. And I know I do this all the time. I'm like, yeah, I'm struggling with this, but if I really try and beat it myself, then I can kind of go to Jesus, and he won't be kind of disappointed in me. That's kind of my thought process. And I think that that's kind of our culture. And what I want to say is, not only does it not work, but it's not how we grow. What happens is, Peter has not only the ability to turn to Jesus, but he has the ability to have the humility to cry out to Jesus. Now, Humility's a tough one. Humility's tough. And I think, not even like in a compared to other people way, but just in what we expect for ourselves. He has that the humility to go, okay, I'm drowning, I'm going down. And I think, how often do we purposely not have humility? Because I'll sink. Like, I might not know I'm sinking, but I can handle this one. This isn't too big. It's just a little sin. If I can't beat this, then how am I going to beat anything? How can I say I'm a follower of Christ if I can't blank? We do that all the time. And I think Jesus here wants us to know that we can cry out. And what really kind of shook me was 31. He says, immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Immediately. Jesus did not wait for Peter to kind of sink a little bit and be like, told you you needed me. It says that Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, which is like the idea that like he was able to get there before Peter had even got underwater was the idea. Like he saved him not just once he has been drowning, but before he started drowning. And it made me think, like, sometimes I feel when I'm doing bad or when I start drowning, because I start focusing on the other things or my circumstances, that Jesus is farther from me than before. He feels far, so he must be far. And what's really weird is Peter's the closest disciple of Jesus here. By a long shot. By a long shot. He's the only one that's visibly struggling, but he's the closest to Jesus. And the funny thing is, Jesus doesn't care that he's sinking. He doesn't care that he's falling. He wants to be there and save him and catch him. So my question is, will you let him? I think we don't sometimes let God catch us. And here's the thing. Jesus only wants two things. And the first one is the hard one. The first one is, you got to admit that you need his help. Because the thing is, his hand's there. His arm's there. He's reaching out. He's ready. He wants to catch you. He will catch you. Like my dad calls this the catch of God. Like he doesn't drop you. He's sure-handed. He doesn't drop. The Bible says that he will not let anyone run from his hand. Or another one says, anyone who runs to him makes it, as in he will receive you. And I think that we can in our lives get stuck with a hard situation. We can go, you know, Jesus, I've been following you, and I got this hard relationship. I'm experiencing persecution in this way. Or I lost a family member, or something unspeakable. And we then look at it and go, God, I'm going to beat this so that I can be close to you, and then I'll come to you. And I think what Jesus is saying, wherever you're at, I'm there. However you're falling, however you're feeling, I'm there. We all got areas. It's easy to be like, okay, well, I'm following Jesus. I don't think that I'm like losing my faith, so I don't really need to call out to him. The thing is, it's not that big. Sometimes it's simple little things. Sometimes it's, man, I have a hard time not reacting with anger. Like, that's an easy one. Whether it's watching a game, or losing a game, or whatever it is. You get angry because somebody does something that's wrong, or they mistreat you, and what we do is we react and go, okay, well, that's a little thing. I don't need God's help there. Like as if God's not interested in those details, those little spots, those little minuscule problems in our life, and we view them like problems. We go, yeah, you know, it's a problem. But Jesus doesn't view it like that. He says, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Focus on me. Reach for me. So remember earlier I told you about Dan. Kind of funny story. Started running. Maybe you've experienced that running. I sure have. Like, not making it. But about that mile in, he was like, I'm done. I can't do it. His external circumstances got big. He called his friend. His friend picked him up at like the 1.5 mile mark. He went home and met his friends at the end of the 13.5 mile marathon with McDonald's. And the point is, he quit. he got back in the boat. Now, in that situation, it might make sense. But sometimes in our lives, we feel like no matter how hard we try, no matter what we do, no matter how much we follow God, that the storms get heavier. The winds get faster, the waves get bigger, the thunder gets louder, it just gets harder and harder and harder. And sometimes we get to this point where it might just be easier to quit. It might actually just be easier, I won't stop following God, but like going to church is tough. Like I gotta get up early and I work late on Saturday night, and maybe it'd just be easier if I just, didn't show up. God is still love me. And what happens is we quit. We get back in the boat. And I think it's easy to do. I think it's easy. Why not get back in the boat? It's easier. Sometimes it looks safer. And my encouragement to you is, don't. Your motivation is not, my friend convinced me. Oh, it sounds cool. Oh, I had a moment. No, this is somebody that put his spirit in you, entrusted you with his mission, and he loves you, and he's there for you. This isn't somebody that's fleeting at one moment and there the next and gone another day. This is Jesus that we're talking about. And regardless of how much it hurts, no matter how much it kind of just keeps on getting worse and getting harder, I encourage you, don't quit, because we can keep our eyes on Jesus. James 1:12 says, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial. If you read that, it's clear that God's saying that there will be trials. There will. In fact, they're probably going to be harder than you can think right now. Usually that's what happens. Usually we think we've hit our max, and the max gets heavier. That's just how it goes. Whether we're talking about lifting or we're talking about our spiritual life, that's how it goes. And what I want to encourage you with today is, he did not call you out of the boat if he didn't call you to walk on the water. He didn't call you out of the boat to sink. His plan was not, I'm going to get you out of the boat and then you're going to sink so then I can kind of save you a little bit. The idea is, yes, that we will sink, but when our eyes are on Jesus, that we do it with him, that we get to walk on this water with Jesus. And the thing is, God wants to use you. And what I'm telling you from earlier is, don't settle for little faith. That's what Jesus says. He says, you have little faith. He says little faith is because he's saying, get me out of the boat. Yeah, it's tough for the moment. But what's tough is sustaining faith. Being able to keep it when you don't feel it. Peter probably had a bunch of adrenaline when Jesus said, come. And he did it, and it was courageous, and it was brave. But sometimes